In the tranquil valley town of Silverstream, a place where time itself seemed to slow down, one man measured his days by the steady tick-tock of the clocks he mended. But what if the hands that could repair the most delicate of movements were the same hands that once delivered swift, cold justice? This is the story of Arthur Pembrey, a simple watchmaker, and the deadly secret he thought he'd left buried in the past. If you find stories of hidden strength and quiet courage compelling, make sure you stick around and consider subscribing, because we have more tales just like this one coming your way. The morning light, soft and golden, streamed through the large, paned window of Pembrey's precision timepieces, illuminating the tiny specks of dust that danced in the air like miniature stars. The light caught on the polished brass and silver of 100 different clocks, each one ticking in a gentle, harmonious chorus. Arthur Pembrey, a man of 57, leaned over his workbench, a jeweler's loupe pressed to his eye. His hands, though weathered and showing the faint criss-cross of a life lived, were unnervingly still as he coaxed a minuscule gear into place. It was a stillness that was both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling, a level of control few men ever achieve. His hair was silver at the temples, and kind lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, which wasn't often, but was always genuine. Beneath that quiet, unassuming exterior lay the honed instincts of a man who had survived 2 decades as the Alchemist, one of the most lethally precise government agents the old world had ever known. His shop was the heart of Silverstream, a picturesque town nestled in a valley, famed for its clockmakers and the peaceful rhythm of its life. The daily ritual of oiling gears and polishing clock faces brought Arthur a profound sense of peace, a peace he had craved when he vanished from his old life 7 years ago. His customers, the good people of Silverstream, knew him only as Mr. Pembrey, the quiet artisan who could mend any timepiece and tell a fascinating story about its history. None of them knew that the faint, almost imperceptible stiffness in his left shoulder was from a poorly set bullet wound he'd sustained during a frantic escape in Constantinople, an operation that had left 5 enemy agents silent forever. Arthur paused his work to adjust his simple waistcoat, a world away from the dark, tailored suits and concealed holsters that had once been his uniform. The only remnants of that life were locked away in a heavy rosewood box beneath his workbench. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, lay a pair of custom-made Bergman Bayard pistols. Their blued steel was immaculate, their walnut grips smooth and dark with age. He hadn't touched them in years, yet every Sunday, without fail, he would meticulously clean and oil them. It was a ritual he could not abandon, a ghost he could not exorcise. The people of Silverstream had welcomed him without question when he arrived 7 years prior, purchasing the rundown shop from the widow of old Mr. Albright, a kind man who had been the town's clockmaker for 50 years. Arthur had paid in cash, using the last of the funds he had been given upon his clandestine retirement, and slowly, piece by piece, he had rebuilt the shop into a respectable cornerstone of the community, a place where farmers, merchants, and gentry alike could find honest work and quiet company. As he worked, Arthur watched the street through the large window. It was a habit that had saved his life more times than he could count. The morning mail coach was late, and that small deviation from routine put a knot in his stomach. In his experience, broken routines were often the heralds of trouble. Constable Davies had stopped by the previous evening, sharing a cup of tea and some unsettling news. "The iron wolves have been at it again," Davies had said, his voice a low rumble of concern. Hit a cobalt shipment heading out of the Blackwood mine. They say 3 guards are dead. Word is they are heading into this valley, led by the Baron's right-hand man. The constable's fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the porcelain cup. They say Dmitri the Wolf Volkov is leading the pack now. That man's a monster. Was one of the Baron's enforcers during the Balkan unrest. Arthur had simply nodded, his expression unreadable, though the phantom smell of cordite and the memory of cold, Eastern European winters threatened to surface. He had crossed paths with the Baron's organization once, a long time ago in a city whose name he tried to forget. Dmitri Volkov had been younger then, but even as a subordinate, he radiated a chilling capacity for violence. They had never aimed their weapons at each other, but Arthur had watched him execute 2 men in a cold, dark alley without a flicker of emotion. The clatter of hooves on cobblestone pulled him back to the present. Arthur looked up to see the mail coach finally arriving, over 2 hours late. The driver's face was ashen as he hauled on the reins, stopping in front of the post office across the street. It wasn't just the delay that caught Arthur's trained eye, but the splintered holes that peppered the wooden sides of the coach, the unmistakable signature of a volley of rifle fire. Putting down his polishing cloth, Arthur moved to a position behind a grandfather clock, one that gave him a better, less obvious view of the street. The coach door creaked open and a well-dressed passenger stumbled out, pale with fear. A woman clutching a small child followed. The driver was speaking animatedly to the postmaster, gesturing wildly back down the road he'd come. Arthur's right hand moved unconsciously toward his hip, only to find the familiar weight of his leather apron where his holster used to rest. The gesture did not go unnoticed by Elara, the town librarian, who was arranging a display of new books in the window of the library next door. "Is everything all right, Mr. Pembrey?" she asked, her dark eyes sharp and perceptive. At 23, Elara managed the library her late father had loved, and she was one of the few people in town who seemed to sense the hidden depths beneath the watchmaker's quiet facade. "Everything is fine, Elara," he replied, his hand moving to straighten his collar. It seems the coach ran into a spot of bother on the road. Before Elara could reply, the door to his shop chimed, and the postmaster, Mr. Gable, hurried in, his face flushed. "Arthur, we have trouble." The coach was ambushed about 10 miles out. The driver says it was a dozen men, all heavily armed. They took the ore samples, but he lowered his voice. They let the coach go. Said they were sending a message to Silverstream. A familiar coldness settled in Arthur's gut, the same feeling he'd had before every major operation in his past. "The Iron Wolves," he stated, though he already knew the answer. Gable nodded grimly. The driver recognized Volkov from a wanted poster. "They're likely holed up in one of the abandoned mining camps, waiting for the right moment to hit the town." Arthur's mind was already working, calculating angles, possibilities, and defensive positions, just as it had been trained to do. Silverstream had 2 main ways in and out, the main road and an old logging trail that snaked through the hills. Constable Davies had only 2 part-time deputies. The nearest military garrison was a full day's ride away. "You should inform the constable," Arthur said, his voice deliberately calm. "It might also be wise to send a rider to the garrison at Fort Hawthorne, though help would arrive too late if the Baron's men decide to move quickly." As Gable scurried out, Arthur met Elara's gaze. Her eyes were asking a question he hadn't seen before, The look of someone who suddenly recognizes a predator hiding beneath a carefully crafted disguise. He had become very good at deflecting those kinds of looks over the years, but now he wondered if maintaining his cover was worth the risk everyone was facing. The rest of the morning passed in a tense, simmering quiet. News of the ambush spread like wildfire, and by noon, the local pub was filled with worried townsfolk sharing anxious whispers. Arthur kept to his shop, listening, gathering fragments of information from those who stopped by. Some said the gang was 20 strong. Others swore it was closer to 30. But they all agreed on one thing: the Iron Wolves were notoriously brutal, known for leaving no witnesses. Constable Davies arrived as the afternoon sun cast long shadows. He'd gathered the town's most prominent citizens in the back room of the pub. Arthur provided them with tea and listened as they debated their options. Davies wanted to evacuate the women and children, but the bank manager argued it would be a sign of weakness. The mayor suggested trying to buy the gang off, while the mining company representative insisted they stand and fight. Throughout the discussion, Arthur felt the weight of his past pressing down on him. He had spent 7 years building a new life, of becoming a different man. The rosewood box under his workbench was calling to him now, a reminder of the man they once called the Alchemist, a man who never missed a shot, whose name was still whispered in the shadowy corners of international espionage. When the meeting concluded, Constable Davies remained, his face etched with worry as he sipped his tea. "You've been quiet, Arthur. What's your opinion on all this?" Arthur slowly polished a small clock face, choosing his words with care. "Men like Volkov, they can smell fear. Trying to negotiate will only make them bolder." Davies studied him for a long moment. "You sound like you know a thing or two about his kind." "I've seen my share of trouble over the years," Arthur replied evasively. "Enough to know that sometimes, standing your ground is the only option you have." The constable nodded slowly, drained his cup and stood. As he reached the door, he paused. "It's a funny thing, Arthur. The way you carry yourself, sometimes it reminds me of stories I used to hear about a government agent they called the Alchemist. A true legend, they said. Vanished about 7 years ago." Arthur kept his expression neutral as he continued his work. "There are a lot of stories out there, Constable. Most of them are just tall tales that get bigger with the telling." Davies gave him one last, long look, then nodded and left. Through the window, Arthur watched him cross the street toward his office, already preparing for what was to come. The late sun was beginning to dip, painting the street in hues of orange and red that reminded Arthur of too many other sunsets, in other cities, before other battles he had tried to leave behind. Elara approached as he set down his tools. "Mr. Pembrey," she said softly, "I heard the constable talking about sending people away. Perhaps you should consider closing the shop for a few days." Arthur looked at the young woman who had become almost like a daughter to him over the years. "Your father entrusted me to look after this part of the street, Elara. I intend to keep you safe." He managed a small smile. "Don't you worry about old Mr. Pembrey. I've weathered worse storms than this." But as the sun finally set and long shadows stretched across the cobblestones of Silverstream, Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life as a watchmaker was about to be shattered. The only question was whether he could protect his adopted home without revealing the man he had been, the man who still lay dormant beneath the leather apron and the kind, quiet smile. As true night fell, Arthur began his evening routine. Though his mind was miles away, his thoughts on the worn leather holsters in the rosewood box upstairs. Every creak of a floorboard, every shadow that passed the window, drew his immediate, focused attention. The town pub was busier than usual for a weekday, filled with townsfolk seeking solace in numbers and ale. The fiddler played jonular tunes that did little to ease the palpable tension in the air. A glint of light caught Arthur's eye. It was the silver locket Elara wore around her neck, a final gift from her father before he passed. Arthur remembered the day Elara's father had introduced them, how the old librarian had looked at him with sharp, knowing eyes before entrusting his daughter's safety to the quiet newcomer. He wondered now if the old man had known more about his past than he'd let on. A sudden commotion at the pub's entrance drew his gaze. 3 men he didn't recognize had swaggered in, the dust of the road still clinging to their heavy coats, their spurred boots clanking on the wooden floor as they made their way to the bar. Arthur watched as their eyes scanned the room, not with the curiosity of ordinary travelers, but with the calculating gaze of predators assessing their territory. "Whiskey," the tallest one demanded, slapping a con on the bar. "The good stuff." As the bartender served them, Arthur caught their reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Their gun belts were worn but well-oiled, their pistols carried low and tied down, the mark of men who used their weapons often. They were undoubtedly a scouting party, sent by the Baron to gauge the town's defenses. "Quite little place you've got here," the tall one commented, gesturing with his glass. "Be a shame if something were to happen to it." The bartender just polished a glass with slow, deliberate movements. "We like it quiet," he replied softly. "Helps a man enjoy his drink." The shortest of the 3 laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Peace ain't gonna last long here, old man. You'd be better off getting a gun instead of that polishing rag." They laughed at that, just as the bartender had intended. Let them see what they expected to see, just another old shopkeeper, too set in his ways to recognize the danger. But Arthur was counting weapons, noting angels of fire, remembering which alleyways offered cover and which were dead ends. The old instincts didn't die easily. As the night wore on, more unfamiliar faces appeared in the pub. Arthur counted at least 5 more men who carried themselves with the same predatory stillness as Volkov's crew. They spread out, some playing cards, others just nursing drinks and watching. They were mapping the town, noting exits, identifying potential threats. Arthur had used the exact same tactics himself in another life. Elara moved between the library tables with grace and efficiency, but Arthur could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. She had grown up in this town, she knew every cobblestone and every face. She knew something was wrong. Later, she came into his shop, closing the door softly behind her. "Those men," she whispered, "they're not just travelers, are they?" Arthur shook his head slightly. "You should go home soon, Elara. Lock your doors." "I'm not leaving you alone with them," she insisted, her jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded him of her father. Before Arthur could argue, the door to the pub swung open with a crash. The newcomer was a mountain of a man. His black duster was caked with the filth of the road, and a grey wolf's head was tattooed on his thick neck, leaving no doubt as to his identity. It was Dmitri the Wolf Volkov. The pub fell silent as he strode to the bar, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. Time seemed to slow for Arthur, just as it always had before a conflict. Every detail became sharp and clear, the way Volkov's duster was cut to allow easy access to his pistols, the calculating sweep of his cold eyes, the subtle shifts of his men around the room. One wrong move now could ignite a bloodbath. The bartender approached him. "What can I get for you?" he asked, his voice as calm as a summer evening. "Depends," Volkov growled, his voice a low rasp. "I hear this whole valley is about to come under new management. Smart folks would be packing their bags, taking what they can carry." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Arthur could see Elara, watching from the library window, her hand clutching her locket. The fiddler had fallen silent, and the usual evening chatter had died to a few hushed whispers. "I can manage," the bartender replied, reaching for a whiskey bottle. "Pour you a drink?" Volkov leaned forward, planting both hands on the bar. His right hand was missing 2 fingers, an old wound that Arthur suspected had a story behind it. "You know what's coming, don't you, old-timer? The smart play is to walk away now. Take the pretty librarian with you. This town's about to see some changes." The bartender poured a measure of whiskey, his movements unhurried. "Everything changes, my friend. The question is what kind of change you are looking to bring." Volkov's eyes narrowed at the man's calm defiance. Most men would be trembling by now, but this one seemed amused. For a split second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, the primal instinct of a predator realizing it might be facing something more dangerous than it first assumed. The moment passed, and Volkov's sneer returned, colder than before. "You'll find out soon enough, old man. Real soon." He straightened up without touching the whiskey. "Have a peaceful evening. It might be your last." As Volkov and his men filed out of the pub, the bartender started polishing glasses again, his movements as methodical and calm as ever, but his mind was racing. The gang's scouts had seen what they came to see. The next time they entered Silverstream, it wouldn't be for a drink. Elara waited until the last of the strangers had left before speaking. "Mr. Pembrey," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "what are we going to do?" Arthur set down the glass he was holding and looked at the young woman who had become part of his quiet life. In her eyes, he saw the same strength he had recognized in her father years ago. "Elara," he said carefully, "there is something I must tell you. And when I have, I need you to take a message to Constable Davies." As the last light faded from Silverstream, Arthur knew his time in hiding was over. Tomorrow would bring violence to his doorstep, and when it did, the quiet watchmaker would have to fade away so the alchemist could live again. After Elara had reluctantly gone home, her face pale but determined, Arthur climbed the creaking stairs to his small apartment above the shop. The floorboards whispered under his feet as he approached the heavy rosewood box at the foot of his bed. His hand trembled slightly as he inserted the key, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of memory. The hinges groaned as he opened the lid, releasing the familiar, metallic scent of gun oil and aged leather. He ran his fingers over the dark, tailored suit folded inside. The fabric was still supple after all these years. Beneath it lay the custom leather rig, holding his twin Bergman Bayard pistols in their holsters. He lifted one, feeling its familiar weight. The walnut grip felt cool and solid in his palm, the barrel gleaming in the lamplight. I never thought I'd have need of you again, he murmured, checking the action. It moved as smoothly as the day he'd stored it away. Arthur had never allowed his weapons to fall into disrepair, not even in retirement. Some habits were impossible to break. Or perhaps, deep down, he had always known this day would come. As he methodically cleaned and loaded the pistols, memories flooded his mind. The shootout in Vienna that had earned him his moniker. The bloody week in the Carpathian Mountains, hunting a rogue cell. The final confrontation in Constantinople that had left him with the scar on his shoulder and a deep-seated weariness of the violence. But it was another memory that weighed heaviest on him tonight, the day he decided to lay down his guns. It had been in a city much like this, a peaceful port town. A young arrogant rival agent had challenged him, a boy barely out of training, trying to make a name for himself. Arthur had tried to talk him down, but the boy wouldn't listen. The image of the boy's grieving mother, her sobs echoing in the narrow street, had haunted Arthur for months. He had travelled until he found Silverstream, hoping to lose himself in the simple, quiet life of a watchmaker. A soft knock on his door pulled him from his reverie. "Mr. Pembrey." It was Elara, her voice a mere whisper. He had been so lost in thought, he hadn't heard her return. He quickly covered the pistols with a cloth. "Come in, Elara." She entered hesitantly, still in her work dress. Her eyes went immediately to the open box, then back to his face. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I kept thinking about what that man Volkov said, and about the message you had me give the constable." Arthur gestured for her to sit on the small armchair by the window. "Did you give him the message?" he asked. She nodded. "I told him exactly what you said, that when the attack comes, he should focus all his men on defending the east end of town and leave the town square in your hands." She paused, looking at him with new eyes. "He went very still when I said that. He asked me if you had finally admitted who you really are." Arthur walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit street. A cat slinked through the shadows, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The town looked peaceful, but he could feel the approaching violence like a storm on the horizon. "Your father knew," he said finally. "The day he agreed to sell me this shop, he recognized me from an old intelligence dossier. Not from the ones that offered rewards, but from the ones that offered thanks from grateful governments. He made me promise two things, that I would protect his daughter, and that I would never bring my old life to this town. Unless I had no other choice." Elara's hand went to the silver locket at her throat. "The stories they tell about the alchemist. They are true." "Some are," he said, turning to face her. "Most are exaggerated with time. I never sought trouble, Elara, but I don't run from it either. Your father was a good man who died protecting what was his. I intend to do the same. The iron wolves will come at dawn, won't they?" He nodded. "It's the Baron's style. He likes the rising sun at his back to blind the defenders." Volkov and his scouts were counting weapons tonight, looking for weak points. "They'll tell the Baron this town is ripe for the taking." A faint smile touched Arthur's weathered face. "But they don't know about you, Elara. And that might just give us the advantage we need." He went to the box and retrieved a smaller, hidden compartment. Inside lay a simple, silver medallion, the highest commendation his former agency bestowed, one he had earned and carried for 12 years before he retired. "Your father once told me a man's true wealth is measured by what he is willing to protect with his life," Arthur said, turning the medallion in his hand. "I've had 7 good years here, Elara. I've built a home. I've found a family I never thought I'd have. If protecting that means becoming the man I once was, then so be it." Elara stood and, to Arthur's surprise, hugged him fiercely. "Father would be so proud," she whispered, "and terrified just like I am." Arthur returned the embrace, a stark reminder of everything he had to lose. "I need you to do something for me," he said softly. "When you leave here, go to Mrs. Gable's boarding house. Most of the women and children are gathering there. It's the building furthest from where the fighting will be." Elara stepped back, wiping her eyes. "And if you don't make it, what happens to the shop?" "I've already taken care of that," Arthur said. "The papers in my desk name you as the owner. If anything happens to me, you have your father's heart and your mother's strength. This place will be in good hands." A long silence stretched between them, filled with words that didn't need to be spoken. Finally, Elara squared her shoulders. "I'll go to the boarding house," she said. "But first, I want you to promise me something." "What is it?" he asked. "Promise me you won't die," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I've already lost one father. I don't want to lose another." Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. "I promise I will do my very best," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Now go. Dawn isn't far off." After she left, Arthur returned to his preparations. He cleaned his pistols one last time, checked his ammunition, and donned the dark, tailored suit that had once struck fear into the hearts of agents across the continent. The weight of the shoulder holster was both foreign and familiar, like greeting an old friend you had hoped never to see again. In the small mirror over his washbasin, a different man looked back at him. The kind, quiet Mr. Pembrey had vanished, replaced by a man with cold, calculating eyes, a man who had built his reputation one precise shot at a time. The Alchemist had returned, and Silverstream would soon discover why that name was whispered with equal parts respect and fear. From his vantage point by the window, Arthur noticed a flicker of movement in the alley across the street. A shadow detaching itself from other shadows. He'd developed a keen eye for such details during his years as an agent, when spotting an ambush could mean the difference between life and death. Another shadow moved near the stables, and a third beside the blacksmith's forge. They were encircling the town square, just as he had anticipated. His mind went back to his last mission, the one that led him to seek peace in Silverstream. It was in that port city, against the young agent Marco. The boy couldn't have been more than 20, full of fire and bravado fueled by cheap whiskey. Arthur had tried to tell him that the 22 notches on his service record were not a source of pride, but ghosts that kept him awake at night. "Son," he'd told him, "there's no glory in dying young, and even less in my killing you." But Marco wouldn't back down. When the sun set that day, another mother was weeping over the body of her son, and Arthur rode east, searching for a place where his guns could finally rest. He'd found it here, in a dusty clock shop owned by a man who saw past his reputation and discovered the tired soul beneath. Now, as the first hint of dawn began to illuminate the town he had grown to love, Arthur moved silently through his shop, rechecking his preparations one last time. He had placed spare ammunition behind the main counter and near the back door. The heavy oak display tables were subtly arranged to provide cover if needed. Even the large mirror behind the counter served a purpose. It would allow him to see anyone attempting to sneak in from the rear while he watched the front. A soft, three-note whistle, barely audible, came from the street. The constable's signal. His men were in position. Arthur answered with a single low whistle of his own. They had devised a simple plan in a hurried meeting the night before. The constable and his deputies would defend the east end of town, where most of the women and children were gathered. Arthur would be in charge of the town square, the main intersection, and a handful of armed townsmen would keep moving, providing covering fire. It wasn't much, Davies had admitted. The best plans are simple, Arthur had replied. Complications get people killed. As the sky began to blush with the first light of dawn, a familiar calm settled over Arthur. It was the same stillness he had felt before every firefight, a clarity of purpose that held fear and doubt at bay. His hands were steady as he checked his pistols a final time. A thought flickered through his mind, a memory of Elara's father, the day he sold him the shop. This place needs more than an owner, the old man had said. It needs a guardian. Someone who understands that peace sometimes has a price. At the time, Arthur had thought he was referring to keeping order among rowdy patrons in the pub, but now he wondered if he had somehow known this day would come. The street remained eerily quiet, but Arthur's experienced ears picked up the subtle sounds of men trying to move in silence, the scuff of a boot on cobblestone, the soft jingle of a spur, the whisper of leather against leather. Volkov was positioning his men with care, believing he was about to surprise a foolish, sleeping town. Arthur allowed himself a grim smile. The element of surprise would be critical in the coming fight, but not in the way the Baron expected. The gang leader had no way of knowing that the quiet Mr. Pembrey had spent countless hours memorizing every angle of approach to the town square, every loose cobblestone, every shadow where a man could hide. And most importantly, he didn't know that the supposedly harmless watchmaker had, just the day before, put 2 rounds through the center of a silver coin from 50 paces, just to assure himself that 7 years of peace hadn't dulled his legendary aim. The first rays of sun crested the eastern hills, and with them came the thunder of hooves. The morning erupted into violence with the suddenness of a summer storm. Riders emerged from the shadows, their horses' hooves pounding the hard-packed earth of the main street. Arthur counted a dozen men in the first wave, with more advancing through the alleys. Dmitri Volkov led the charge, his grey wolf tattoo seeming to snarl in the dawnlight. The Baron himself was nowhere to be seen, just as Arthur had expected. The gang leader would wait to make his grand entrance until he believed the situation was under control. Gunfire erupted from the east end of town as Constable Davies and his men engaged a flanking party. Arthur remained perfectly still behind the front window of his shop, watching as Volkov and his men reined in their horses in a loose semicircle before the square. Their confidence was evident in their casual posture and the unhurried way they aimed their rifles at the shop's entrance. "Come on out, old man." Volkov's voice boomed across the empty square. "Time for a little chat about your establishment's future." Arthur answered with 2 quick shots through the window pane. The first snatched the hat from Volkov's head. The second shattered the whiskey bottle one of his men was drinking from with reckless bravado. Both were warning shots, delivered with such precision that even a seasoned gunman would pause. There was a stunned silence, broken only by the exchange of fire from the other end of town. Volkov's face had gone pale beneath his weather-beaten tan. Those were not the uncontrolled shots of a frightened shopkeeper, but the work of an expert marksman. "That was your only warning," Arthur called out, his voice calm and authoritative, the same voice that in another time had made hardened criminals surrender rather than face him. "The next ones will draw blood. Leave Silverstream while you still can." A nervous laugh rippled through the gang, but it held a note of uncertainty. Volkov squinted at the dark window of the shop, trying to pinpoint Arthur's location. "Looks like the old dog still has some bite," he snarled. "But you are outnumbered, friend. By my count, there's 20 of us and one of you." "You count as poorly as you dress," Arthur replied coolly. "You have 15 men, not 20. 3 guarding the back alleys, 4 attempting to flank by the stables, and 8 in front with you. Though, I suppose it's 7 now, seeing as how brave your friend with the bottle looks." The accuracy of Arthur's assessment sent a ripple of unease through the gang. Volkov's hand twitched toward his pistol, but Arthur's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't do that. Unless you want to find out if the stories they tell about the alchemist are true." The name fell like a stone into a quiet pool. Arthur could see recognition and fear dawn on several faces. Volkov's remaining fingers whitened on his reins. "The alchemist is dead," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "He disappeared years ago." "Did I?" Arthur stepped into the shattered window frame so they could see him clearly. The dark suit, the twin pistols, the stance that had been immortalized in a dozen secret government reports. "It seems to me I just grew tired of killing and decided to try mending clocks instead." "But you lot just had to insist, didn't you?" More shots echoed from the east end of town, closer now. The gang members shifted restlessly in their saddles. They had come expecting to terrorize a helpless town, not to face a living legend. Volkov licked his lips, calculating odds that had suddenly and decisively turned against him. "If you really are who you say you are," he yelled, "prove it. Show us some of that famous trick shooting." Arthur's response was swift and devastating. His right hand, a blur of motion, fired 4 shots in a rapid, deafening succession. 4 of Volkov's men cried out as their rifles were violently knocked from their hands, each weapon struck precisely on the hammer or trigger guard, rendered useless. The display of marksmanship was something most of them had never seen. "Is that proof enough?" Arthur asked, his voice deceptively soft. "Or shall I start aiming for center mass?" Volkov's face had gone from pale to ashen. Every story he'd ever heard about the alchemist was true. The inhuman speed, the impossible accuracy, the terrifying calm that was more frightening than any hot-tempered rage. But he had his orders, and his fear of the Baron was greater than his fear of any legend. "Kill him!" Volkov roared, finally drawing his own weapon. The street erupted in a chaotic volley of fire. Arthur was already moving, diving behind an overturned cart as bullets splintered the facade of his shot. His return fire was measured and precise. 2 shots found Volkov, one in his shooting arm, the other in the hand holding the reins, sending the big man tumbling from his saddle. 3 more gang members opened fire from the alleys, trying to catch Arthur in a crossfire, but he had anticipated the move. The heavy oak cart gave him perfect cover as he rolled behind it, emerging at the far end to drop two of them with shots to the leg before they could adjust their aim. The third man threw down his gun and ran. Arthur's voice cut through the gunfire, as steady as if he were still discussing the weather. "That's 6 of you down, and I haven't killed anyone yet. Leave now and you can walk away from this. Stay, and I will show no more mercy." A bullet ricocheted off the cart near his head. Arthur nodded to himself, ejected the spent casings, and reloaded with a fluid economy of motion that had once made him famous among his peers. The fast draw was admired, but the fast reload was feared. It spoke of experience, and experience meant survival. Through the smoke, he could see more gang members taking cover behind wagons and water troughs. They were professionals, adjusting their tactics now that they knew what they were facing. But Arthur had positioned himself perfectly. The rising sun was at their backs, forcing them to squint into the light while he remained in relative shadow. A movement caught his eye. One of the gang was trying to circle around to the side entrance of the library. Arthur put a bullet through his thigh, sending him sprawling. "Doors locked," Arthur called out conversationally. "It's a long, painful crawl back." The wounded man scrambled for cover, leaving a trail of blood on the cobblestones. Arthur did a quick mental tally. 3 men seriously wounded, including Volkov. 4 with hand or arm injuries. 1 had fled, and another was trying to crawl away. That left 5 still in the fight, not counting the Baron, who had yet to show his face. As if on cue, a new voice cut through the morning air, cold and imperious. "Arthur? Is that you?" Arthur's jaw tightened. He knew that voice. Deeper now than it was in the Balkans, but with the same chilling tone. The Baron Victor Orlov had finally decided to make an appearance. "It's been a long time, Victor," Arthur called back. "You've moved up in the world. Got your own little army now. And you've been demoted," the Baron replied, stepping into the street. "From legendary agent to a shopkeeper in a forgotten town. I suppose time gets the best of us all." A sad smile touched Arthur's lips. "Seems to me you're the one who's been demoted. Half your men are out of commission, and you haven't even made it through the front door." A dark chuckle echoed across the street. "You were always good with numbers, Arthur. But you've miscalculated. You see, while you were playing with Volkov and his boys, the rest of my men have been preparing something special. Take a look up at the roof of the town hall." Arthur's blood ran cold as he shifted his gaze to the building where he'd sent Elara and the others to gather. There, silhouetted against the morning sky, stood 2 of the Baron's men. And kneeling between them was a familiar figure, a silver locket glinting at her neck. "Elara," Arthur whispered, a cold rage building in his chest. "Now," the Baron called out, his voice dripping with triumph, "shall we discuss the future of Silverstream? And this time, I suggest you listen very, very carefully." Arthur's fingers tightened on the grips of his pistols. The game had just changed, and the Baron knew it. The question was, did he understand what a man like the Alchemist would do to protect his family? Through the window of his shop, Arthur saw a flicker of movement on the roof of the adjacent building. Constable Davies, in position with a rifle. The old lawman had obviously seen Elara too, but her presence gave Arthur not despair but hope. "All right, Victor. Arthur shouted, his mind racing through a new set of calculations. You have my attention. Let's talk. As the Baron's boots echoed on the cobblestones, Arthur sent a silent prayer of thanks to old Mr. Albright for one final gift. The forgotten service tunnel, connecting the library's cellar to the town hall basement. He'd never told Elara about it, but he had made sure Mrs. Gable knew, just in case a day like this ever came. The real question was, could he keep the Baron talking long enough for the tunnel to serve its purpose? This confrontation was about to reach its bloody conclusion, one way or another, and Arthur intended to make sure Elara was safe when it did. He checked his pistols one last time, listening to the Baron's approaching footsteps. What happened next would define not only their fates, but the future of Silverstream. The Baron stood in the center of the street, a tall, imposing figure, casting a long shadow in the morning sun. The years had hardened him, replacing youthful arrogance with a cold, refined cruelty. His coat was expensive, his custom revolver a work of art, the trappings of a man who had built an empire on violence. But it was his eyes that held Arthur's attention. They were dead eyes, empty of everything but cold calculation. You know, the funny thing, Arthur, the Baron called out as he approached, is that I'd heard the rumors you were hiding out around here. I didn't believe them. The great alchemist mending clocks in a backwater town. It seemed too absurd. People change, Victor, Arthur said, his voice calm, though his mind was racing. He had to keep him talking. He scanned the town hall roof for any sign. Some of us learn there's more to life than the body count. The Baron's laugh was sharp, like shattering glass. That's the sound of weakness. The Arthur I knew wouldn't have hesitated to put a bullet between Volkov's eyes instead of just wounding him. You've gone soft in your old age. I've gone wise. Killing is the easy part. It's the living with it that's hard. But you never understood that, did you? What I understand, the Baron said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is power. Look around you, Arthur. This town, these people, they are nothing. Just another asset on a map, another opportunity for men like us to take what we want. He gestured with his revolver. That's where you are wrong, Victor. These people aren't nothing, they're everything. They're the reason men like me took up arms in the first place. To protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Fine words, the Baron sneered. But let's see how they hold up when you start seeing them made an example of. Perhaps we'll start with the girl. Elara, isn't it? Bring her forward, boys. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to remain still. If his assumption was correct, if Mrs. Gable had remembered the tunnel, he just needed a few more moments. You know what your problem always was, Arthur? The Baron continued, clearly savoring the moment. You never understood that a reputation is worthless if you aren't prepared to use it. All those stories about the alchemist, the fastest shot on the continent, the man who never missed. And here you are, hiding behind a workbench, pretending to be respectable. A sudden commotion on the town hall roof drew his attention. One of the Baron's men was gesturing wildly, while the other seemed to be searching for something. Elara was nowhere to be seen. The Baron's face darkened. What is going on up there? Boss, one of the men yelled down, his voice panicked. She's gone. She just vanished. The Baron's hand tightened on his gun. But Arthur was already moving. His first shot struck the Baron's hand, sending his ornate pistol spinning into the dust. His second tore through his shoulder, staggering him backward. Before anyone could react, Arthur had rolled out from behind the cart and positioned himself behind another clock, his pistols covering both the Baron and the remaining members of the gang. Mrs. Gable remembered the tunnel, Arthur called out, allowing himself a grim smile. "Looks like you're out of cards to play, Victor." The Baron's face was a mask of fury and pain. "Kill him. Kill them all." The street erupted in gunfire again, but this time, Arthur had no reason to hold back. His pistols spat fire in a deadly rhythm, each shot finding its mark with lethal precision. 2 gang members fell from the town hall roof. Another crumpled as he tried to break from cover. Amid the chaos, Arthur moved like a phantom, never staying in one place long enough to draw concentrated fire. A rifle cracked from above. Constable Davies was making his presence known. One of the Baron's men spun and fell, clutching his chest. Another threw down his weapon and ran, only to be shot down by his own leader. No one runs. The Baron screamed, blood pouring from his shoulder. No one surrenders. But his men had seen enough. They had come expecting an easy target, instead, they had stumbled upon a legend, and now they watched their advantage crumble. One by one, they began to break, scrambling for their horses or simply fleeing on foot. Arthur stood, both pistols aimed at the Baron. "It's over, Victor. Your men are finished. The girl is safe. All that's left to decide is how this ends for you." The Baron's laugh was a ragged snarl. "You think I care about them? I came here to kill a legend, Arthur. To prove that all those stories about the alchemist were just that, stories. And I'm not leaving until one of us is dead." "As you wish." Arthur's voice was soft, laced with a deep sadness. "But remember, you chose this ending. Not me." The morning sun was high now, painting the street in stark light and long shadows. The 2 men faced each other in the blood-stained dust, their shadows stretching out behind them like ghosts of their younger selves. For a moment time seemed to stand still, the world holding its breath for the final act of a story that had begun years ago in the Balkans. A distant rumble of thunder echoed as Arthur prepared for what had to come. He had tried to leave this life behind. He had tried to find peace in mending clocks instead of dealing lead. But some stories demand their own ending. And this one was going to end where it was always destined to end, in smoke and blood under a western sun. The moment stretched, a thread pulled taut, ready to snap. The morning wind swept through Silverstream, carrying the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic taste of blood. The Baron's wounded shoulder stained his expensive coat, but his eyes burned with a zealot's fire. The last of his men had either fled or taken cover, leaving the street strangely empty, save for the fallen. Constable Davies kept his rifle trained on the scene, knowing better than to interfere in what was coming. "Do you remember the Balkans, Arthur?" The Baron's voice cut across the space between them. "Do you remember what you told me that day, over the bodies of those couriers?" Arthur remembered. How could he forget? The Baron had been younger then, but already showing the signs of the monster he would become. "I told you there's a difference between being good with a gun and having a clean soul. And I told you a soul doesn't count for much in our line of work." The Baron's lips twisted into a feral grin. "Time has proven me right. Every town I've broken, every man I've killed, has been a message to men like you. Law, order, justice, they're just words. Power is the only truth. So why come to Silverstream? Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. To prove your point. The Baron's laugh was hollow. I came because all legends need an ending. The great alchemist, hiding behind a clockmaker's apron in a dusty, forgotten town, that's not an ending worthy of the stories. But shot down defending his precious townsfolk. That's the kind of tale that lasts forever. You always did like the sound of your own voice, Victor. Arthur's tone was conversational, but his eyes never left the Baron's hands. All that blood, just to prove something to a man you met once in a forgotten war. Not just to prove something. The Baron's right hand twitched, the tell he always had before he made his move. After today, the name the Baron will mean more than the alchemist ever did. The man who killed the legend. Now that's a legacy worth building. Arthur shook his head sadly. You still don't get it. You never did. It was never about the legend or the reputation. It's about a choice. Every morning we choose who we are going to be. I chose to stop killing. I chose to build something instead of destroying. You are still that same angry young man I met in the Balkans, trying to prove his worth with a gun. Enough talk. The Baron's voice was a whip crack. Time to see if that speed of yours is real, old man, or if all those years of mending clocks has made you slow. Arthur didn't reply. His stance shifted almost imperceptibly, balancing his weight, relaxing his hands near his pistols. He had dreaded this moment, but deep down, he had always known it would come. Some stories can only end one way. The wind died down. A shutter creaked somewhere down the street. Arthur caught a flicker of movement in an upstairs window. Elara's face watching, despite his orders to stay hidden. Another face seemed to appear beside hers, the ghost of her father, perhaps, come to see if he had kept his promise to protect his daughter. The Baron's draw was just as the stories described it, impossibly fast, smooth as flowing water. His pistol seemed to materialize in his hand, the muzzle already pointing at Arthur's chest as the roar of the shot shattered the morning silence. But Arthur's marksmanship was truly the stuff of legend. He drew both pistols in a single fluid motion, firing them simultaneously with a deafening crack. The Baron's bullet whistled harmlessly past Arthur's ear. But Arthur's two shots found their marks. One hit the hand holding the pistol, shattering the grip and sending the weapon flying. The other struck his right shoulder, the same one Arthur had shot earlier, spinning him halfway around. The Baron staggered but did not fall. His face was a mask of disbelief as he stared at his ruined hand. You didn't kill me. I told you, Arthur said, keeping both pistols trained on him. I don't do that anymore. But if you want to try for another draw, I might reconsider. A shadow of the old Baron, the angry young man from the Balkans, crossed his face, and his left hand dropped toward his second pistol. Arthur's next shot hit him in the leg, buckling him to the ground. His fourth shot kicked his backup pistol away from his scrabbling fingers. Each shot was precise, deliberate, and non-lethal. I'd advise you stay on the ground, Arthur said softly. I have 6 more rounds, and I'm running out of non-vital places to put them. For a moment, it looked like the Baron might try again, but then the fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving only a bitter, seething hatred. You should have killed me, Arthur, he spat. Because I will get up, and when I do, you'll spend the next 20 years in a federal prison, assuming you survive the journey. Constable Davies's voice was firm, his rifle never wavering from the Baron's chest. Your gang is dead, wounded, or has fled. The ones we've captured will testify to everything. The mines, the killings, all of it. Your days of freedom are over. More townsfolk were emerging now, armed with rifles and shotguns. They moved with caution, securing the wounded gang members, checking the bodies. Arthur kept his pistols on the Baron until Davies's deputies had him in cuffs and led him away. Then, slowly, he holstered his weapons. The morning seemed unnaturally bright after the darkness of the violence. Arthur felt every one of his 57 years as he surveyed the aftermath of the shootout. The street was littered with spent casings, bloodstains, and the debris of sudden violence. But the town was still standing. And its people were safe. Elara ran from the library toward him, ignoring Mrs. Gable's attempts to stop her. She collided with Arthur with such force that it knocked the wind out of him, her arms wrapping around him in a desperate, tight hug. I saw everything, she sobbed into his chest from the upstairs window. I never knew you could do that. Arthur returned the hug with one arm, the other hand coming to rest near his holstered pistol out of sheer habit. I never wanted you to see that side of me, Elara. I never wanted anyone here to see it. But we needed to, she insisted, stepping back to look at him. People needed to know that we had a protector all along. My father knew, didn't he? That's why he sold you the shop. Arthur nodded slowly. Your father was a perceptive man. He saw right through my attempts to hide. It seems to run in the family, he said, managing a small smile. The townsfolk were gathering, looking at Arthur with new eyes. Some held looks of awe, others of gratitude, but all of them were re-evaluating the quiet watchmaker they had known for 7 years. He could see the questions forming on their lips, the stories beginning to take shape. Constable Davies approached, his rifle held loosely in his hands. That was some fine shooting, Arthur. Or should I say Alchemist? Arthur is fine, he replied. It's been a long time since I answered to the other name. Perhaps you should reconsider, Davies suggested. This town could use a man who knows which end of a gun is which. No, Arthur said, his voice firm but kind. My days as an agent are done. But if Silverstream needs a guardian. He looked at Elara, then back at the little shop that had become his home. Well, I suppose a watchmaker sees and hears everything he needs to know in a town. Perhaps that's guardian enough. Davies nodded, a look of understanding on his face. He touched the brim of his hat and went to supervise his deputies. What happens now? Elara asked. Arthur looked at her, seeing the same determined expression her father used to wear. Now, he said, we clean up the shop. We fix what's broken. And we open for business. It's been a long morning. The folks will probably be wanting a cup of tea. But as he turned back toward his shop, the Baron's hoarse voice called out from where he lay, bound and bleeding. This isn't over, Alchemist. A legend like yours draws killers like moths to a flame. They'll come for you. All of them. Arthur paused, and then spoke without turning around. Let them come. They'll find what you found. A quiet town, a simple watchmaker, and if they're unlucky, A reminder that some legends are earned the hard way. As he stepped back into his shop, Elara at his side, the morning sun cast their long shadows across the street. A father and a daughter, a gunman and his conscience, walking together into the new day that awaited them. If you were captivated by the story of the Alchemist, you won't want to miss the 2 videos on your screen right now. Each one is a tale of hidden strength and unexpected heroism, just waiting for you to discover. Just click on one to continue the journey. And please, if this story moved you, consider leaving a comment below. What part of Arthur's story resonated with you the most? Sharing your thoughts helps our community grow, and subscribing ensures you never miss another tale from our collection. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the quietest people have the loudest stories to tell.